afternoon, everyone. Welcome to PCCI again. Yvonne, welcome back. Yvonne was with us earlier uh, in uh, in elements of graphic design. Now, Christine, you don't have a webcam. Are you there, Christine?
I have a webcam, sir. It's lagging. My internet is lagging.
Okay,
Unstable.
no worries, no worries. I just needed to know that you're there. Okay, so
Okay.
let's proceed. For since this webinar, we'll we'll try to discuss this as quickly as possible. And if you have questions, please do ask them. If you can't ask the question right away, you may do so later on. Make sure that you jot your question down. uh, I'll also ask you a few questions, a few relevant questions from time to time, depending on where we're at. We'll have a couple of breaks. Those are either 10 or 15-minute breaks, quick breaks during the session, and that's the time where you can go to the bathroom or get some coffee or get some water. Uh, uh, so at least we're not bogged down. Okay, let's proceed. Let me share my screen with you. So, okay, does everyone see my screen? Everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Christine, I need you to respond by voice since you don't have a camera. So some of you,
It
okay,
works here.
okay. So just simply say yes, if ever, and then some of the questions I may ask you or address you directly. Okay. So from time to time, since is there any foreigner here who does not understand Tagalog? Even my Tagalog is slang. Anyway, anyway, so just in case bigla ako managalog and since we all understand Tagalog naman here, from time to time baka managalog lang ako. Okay, but I'll try to speak in English as much as possible. Okay, let's proceed. So, what do you see on your screen right now? Just to make sure. What do you see on the screen? Giro. Uh, Unmute yourself temporarily by pressing spacebar.
It's a car.
It's a car. Okay, it's an illustration of a car. Does everyone confirm? Yvonne?
Yes.
Yes,
Correct.
okay. So we're in the same page. Noy? JR?
Yes, sir, correct.
Christine? Okay. Christine?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is an illustration of a car. More specifically, this is half a picture of a car that's fully rendered and half which is line art or wireframe. Okay. This was done in, guess which application? Anyone? Anyone can chime in. Anyone?
Illustrator.
Illustrator? Are you sure? It's not CAD? I might have done this in CAD. Are you sure?
Wild guess.
Wild guess. Very good. Now, this was done, of course, in Adobe Illustrator. I've been using Adobe Illustrator for quite a long time, along with Photoshop, and for a certain time in design. Kasi before in design, there was this little known application or page layout program that was the predecessor of InDesign. Do you know what application that is? The predecessor of InDesign. Anyone? No? Yvonne? Don't know? Jiro? Christine? JR?
No idea.
No idea. So, how about Noy? Have an idea kung ano yung application na yon?
Photoshop.
No. Page layout program, the predecessor ng InDesign. No?
Sorry, sir.
Okay, no worries. It's PageMaker. You should know because it's the granddaddy of page layout programs. Okay? There are other page layout programs like Quark Express and RSG and even Freehand for that matter were used as a page layout program. Okay? So, wait. So I can see all of you. Now, this is the Adobe Power Cube of graphic design. Now, why Power Cube? Because we're using the three most powerful programs in Adobe when it comes to graphic design. Okay, they're called. I call those three the Power Cube, as in the power of three. Okay, so by the way, I'm also an ACE, an ACA, and an ACI. To be an ACE in Illustrator, I have to pass a test. To be an ACA is Adobe Certified Associate in Graphic Design, meaning I had to pass three exams, which are AI, PS, and ID. Okay, and ACI, I have to be an ACE and to become an ACI, which is an Adobe certified instructor. Okay, it's required. Recently, Adobe requires all PCCI instructors who teaches Adobe applications to become Adobe certified experts or ACEs. Okay, now an introduction. Okay, we have the three applications. You can learn them one by one. Okay, it's actually basically easy to learn them one by one. Okay, uh, we can call them the power line. Okay, you go from one point, one application, the next application, and the next application. There's also the power triangle. You can learn two applications at a time. In most cases, most people learn AI and PS, okay, almost simultaneously or one after the other, or PS and ID, or ID and AI. Okay, with the other application, the third application being supplement or support application. But the best way to learn these three applications is through the Power Cube. Okay, because all of them are interconnected and have similarities across the board, and that's what we're going to discuss now or today. So, an overview. We have vector and bitmap images. What are vector images? Anyone? Uh, Before you answer that, who amongst you have used Illustrator before?
I have I have used
Okay.
an Illustrator.
You've been using Illustrator. Aside from Illustrator, let's talk to Jiro muna. Aside from Illustrator, Jiro, do you use Photoshop and InDesign as well?
No, I just use Illustrator
You,
for
you
vector
don't,
art.
okay, you don't do photo manipulation or anything like that? Photo editing?
No,
Okay.
no.
How about Noe? What apps do you use?
Sir, basic Photoshop.
Photoshop. How about InDesign and Illustrator? You haven't used it yet?
Never yet. Never.
Okay. Yvonne?
Sir, Photoshop and Illustrator. And
Okay.
basic in design.
Okay. JR?
Sir, mainly Photoshop and
Mainly,
Illustrator basic po and design.
okay. Christine?
Newbie here.
As in, no application yet?
I took some basic Photoshop with
Okay.
Mr. Mario.
Okay. When did you take that?
Was Last week, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, last
Okay,
week.
so Christine here is, we call them greenhorns or a fresh victim. I mean, a new learner. I'm just kidding, okay? Just lightening the mood. So, Christine here is a good candidate for the Power Cube because basically she has learned one application. But knowing that one application, she'll be able to learn, all of you will be able to learn the other applications because of their similarities across the board. Now, here, what's the difference? What is a vector image? Jiro, since you said you've been using Illustrator, what is a vector image?
I think it's an image that consists points and line like that.
Okay. Points and paths. How about bitmap images? Noi.
As far as I know, sorry, bitmap yung ginagamit. Pixels.
Pixels, okay? The bitmap itself, the unit of a bitmap is pixel. Okay, the term bitmap came from the earlier days, as for sure June. You know the TV screens, okay? Those are bitmaps. The white noise that we see in the TV screens, those are uh, bitmaps. So every point, every pixel is a point of data, and whatever it contains, when we add, pointillism, right? And in grade school and high school, we used to do that. We draw or we illustrate something using points or from the pen. Okay, okay, the more points, the darker the color, the less points, the lighter it is. It's similar to what we do in Photoshop. So in vector, you create shapes using points and paths. Whereas in Photoshop or in bitmap images, you create shapes or images using bits of information. Okay? Now, between the two objects, which is a vector and a bitmap? Yvonne,
Vector is on the left side.
vector is on the left side.
Bitmap,
Bit,
bitmap is on the right side.
basically, this is a trick question. Both of them are already bitmap. But for the sake of demonstration, one of them actually was a vector, meaning a vector is something that when you scale up or zoom in on, okay, it will still be sharp. Whereas the bitmap, when you zoom in or scale it up, the pixels will start to appear or enlarge. Okay, a pixel is actually a square dot. Okay, and when you arrange it in a sequence like tiles, it will create an image depending on the information on the pixel. It will be black, white, uh, red, yellow, so on and so forth. Okay? Now, on the monitor screen where colors are produced using light, okay, black is actually zero, meaning there's no light coming out of that pixel. Whereas white, it's all of the three colors, the three primary light colors, red, green, and blue, all turned on. And when they overlap, it produces white. Uh, you can see later on, that's how LED screens produce white and other colors, okay, by the combination of those three colors. Now, a matter of resolution, okay? What is resolution? Christine, what is resolution?
Already forgot about it.
Thank you for being honest. Yvonne, what is resolution? I have a joke about resolution, okay? So, do you want to hear the joke first?
Yeah.
Okay, resolution is not the thing that you do on December 31, then forgot to do on January 1. What is that resolution? December 31, January 1. What? It's
New
not
Year's
the New Year's resolution, okay? Resolution is the amount of information that you have on an image. Let's say you have a 1 by 1 inch image with 72 DPI resolution. It simply means that your image at 1 inch by 1 inch, by the way, your thumb uh, uh, approximately is an inch. Try measuring that. Okay, your thumb, if you are an average height person, your thumb will be an inch long. This particular section, the first section of your thumb, will be around an inch. Okay, so you will have 72 pixels on those. Can you see? Yeah. So, can you see the color? Everyone, can you see it? No?
It's too parser. Medyo malayo.
How about now? Can you see it now? It's too far. That's actually a matter of resolution. Can you see it now? Can?
Yes.
Okay. So what do you see now? They're close enough? So what do you see now?
A square.
Where?
Uh, Technically a square. I'm not sure if it's an actual square because I just drew this randomly. So resolution means you have 72 dots here and 72 dots here. Okay? So that's what you have for resolution. So this is 72 dpi. Now, if you make this 300, you now have what resolution? Of course, you have 300 dots per inch. The 300 dots per inch, or pixels per inch for that matter, will have more information compared to the 72 dots per inch. If you view this at one, if this is 1:1 at 72, okay, your 300 dpi would be larger when you view it 1:1. Okay, that's how resolution works. And Brian mentioned earlier that it's too far. Zooming it a little bit closer, you are able to see the image clearer. Correct? Correct? That's basically how resolution works. Okay, in terms of seeing detail or data. Now, here's another example of resolution. When you view a poster, how close do you need to view it to be able to see the detail? Probably an arm's length you'll be able to read. Too close, you won't be able to read uh, most of the. You'll be able to read an isolated portion, but the rest you won't be able to see. At arm's length, you will be able to see the whole poster, 18 by 24 inches poster. Uh, the reverse is true when you're viewing a 50 by 50 foot banner or billboard for that matter. Okay? So if you're viewing the billboard too close, you won't be able to see anything at all, just that section there. So how do we view billboards? From a certain distance. Okay, that's how similar, that's how resolution works. Also, if you're viewing it that far, you don't need a high resolution for that. As such, a matter of resolution, 300 is the standard resolution for images used when we use images for print. This is the standard resolution, 300. Now, back then, in order to conserve hard disk space, what's happening to Noy? Are you okay, Noy?
Yes, sir. Dahil lang meron lang.
Okay.
Sige lang. Go, diretso lang.
It looks like you're dancing, so I kind of got distracted. Okay, anyway, previously we had 300. 300 dpi is the standard resolution for images used in print. Okay, if you have 300 dpi and you need to purpose it for web, you need a different resolution. Okay, so 300 dpi, and then back then, 19 kopong ago, more than 20 years ago, when I started doing graphic design, in order to save hard disk space, because back then our hard disks were minuscule. How large are your hard disk space or your hard disk? JR, what's your hard disk specification?
Like 160 gig.
160 gig. Okay, that's relatively small because you're using SSD, right?
Currently, sir, it's 500.
500 SSD?
Yes.
Okay. Depending on what you're using, because SSDs are still a bit expensive, okay? You may be using something from 144 to 512 gigabytes. We don't have terabytes yet on some computers have terabytes already on like for example, on the desktop, okay? Now, back then, if we have something like 256, we're already rich. 256 megabytes hard disk. Can you imagine that? Can you see how far we've gone in a matter of a decade or so? Okay? The first time we had the value G as in 1 gigabyte was in a removable hard drive called Jazz. Okay? And then we had the 100 megabyte floppy disk called Zip. Okay? Easily broke. Of course, before that, we store files in 144, 1.44 megabyte floppy disks. So imagine we have a 300 dpi file. We have to save it in a smaller, we don't save it in JPEG, by the way. We save it in TIFF, but in a smaller value, which is 225. And then we compress it. We have the file compressors to fit in a 144. Sometimes it's not enough. We have to split those files in sections. So sometimes we have like 10 floppy disks for a single file. That makes it around 10 megabytes. Okay? So we've gone far since then. 150. In some cases, when we need to archive files, we do not save it as JPEG. We still save it as TIFF or PSDs, but in 150 dots per inch. Okay? We lose data, we lose information, but still we have a large enough file size for web use later on. Okay, of course we have separate archiving disks back then, the Jazz disk, but they tend to be not really so reliable at all. Now, 100. This is a precursor to saving. This is a medium resolution that can be repurposed later on for web, which is 72 dpi. Now, 72 dpi is the standard web resolution. Okay? So sometimes when you click on an object and it zooms in or it goes up really, really big, it means that it's really a high resolution object viewed at 72 dpi. Okay, this is what that is. Okay, 1 by 1 inch. Later on, we can try it later. 1 by 1 inch 72 dpi and 1 by 1 inch 300 dpi or dpi for that matter. Okay, so 50. Now, 50 and 35 are two resolutions that we use for I mentioned it earlier. You view it from
Billboard.
afar. Billboards, okay? 50 is still rather high. But certain print shops who print tarps or large format, okay, bring it down to 35 because it wouldn't really matter. Of course, I've heard people say when I ask them what is the resolution you use to lay out 1:1 from afar, or a billboard say 50 by 50 feet. That's feet. 50 by 50 feet is how much? How many in inches? How many inch is there? How many inches is there in a feet? In a foot, sorry. How many inches?
12.
We have 12. Okay, 12 is a magic number. 12 times 50 is
600.
600. So you have 600 inches at 300 dpi. We'll check that later on. Okay? Now, last but not least is 12. What's 12? This is a trick question. What is 12 in context? When you start typing, what is 12? Any word or word processing application, or even in design or Illustrator, what is 12 when you start typing? Anyone?
On size.
Pardon? Font size. Thank you very much, Christine. It's the default font size. Okay. Among all of the rest, this is the odd man out because 12 is actually the default font size. Okay. Now, let's proceed. Let's compare these three applications. First and foremost, the work area. When you use Illustrator, Photoshop, or InDesign, and this has happened in some of my classes, okay, they get confused sometimes which application they're on because they look the same. Especially now when Adobe introduced the dark mode. Okay, I do not like the dark mode. Why? Because everything is dark. Everything is in reverse. I'm used to the standard color neutral gray. Uh, so whenever I update to a new version or use another computer, okay, I create a new workspace and create a lighter mode because it's easier. Dark colors tend to make all other colors bright. Okay, so when you're using dark mode, everything that you perceive is bright and light. Whereas if you're using neutral gray, you're seeing the colors as neutrally as possible. So it doesn't have any color variances. Okay, and back then we have hoods on top of the monitor to prevent overhead lighting from interfering with our visual. Nowadays, we no longer need to do that because the temperatures are regulated in LCD and LED screens. I think I mentioned that earlier as well. Okay, so the work area. This is the work area of what application? The hint is there.
Illustrator.
Illustrator. If you go to the next one, they look the same, right? They look similar. They look close. Okay, you can mistake one for the other if not by the their tags here. If I remove those tags, if I remove those indicators, people who are not really familiar with the applications can get confused sometimes. Pardon? Especially with Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop because they both have dark modes. But in design so far doesn't really have a dark mode. It's still the neutral gray. Okay, so what I do normally when when in my setup, I usually put Illustrator and Photoshop in medium or light gray, so it's easier for me to perceive the colors correctly between the applications, and that is very, very important. Okay, so any questions so far? No questions? Okay, let's continue. This is the preferences of which application? Can you guess? If you're familiar with the three preferences panels, you'll be able to, which one?
Photoshop.
One more guess. One more guess. You only have one more guess. Why? Because the other one doesn't have a dark mode. Only two have,
Illustrator.
of course. So this is Illustrator. Now, if you notice, I have a certain pattern. For example, which one is first here? Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign. I arranged it in such a way of how frequent I use the applications. Okay, not by preference, but by frequency of use. Okay, so especially nowadays, I rarely use InDesign because I don't normally work with multiple page documents anymore. Not really that much. Most of what I do are banners, are posters, so single page documents. So I don't really need InDesign that much. And I do a little bit of photo editing from time to time and photo compositing from time to time as needed, but it's also minimal. So my most used application is Illustrator, next is Photoshop, next is InDesign. This is not a matter of importance or preference. This is a matter of use. So here, this is the preferences panel of Illustrator. This is the preferences panel of course, this is Photoshop. Okay. Okay. So this is the preferences panel of Photoshop. They are similar that they have both the appearance setting, okay? Not the appearance panel, but the appearance setting or the interface setting. And you can distinguish them, the preferences panel of Illustrator, preferences panel of Illustrator is actually a bit larger, okay? Now, the toolboxes. Here, with Illustrator and Photoshop, you have similar similar tools, but they function very, very differently. Okay, this is the toolbox of Adobe Illustrator. Okay, it hasn't really changed over the years. This is a slightly older version, and you can use the toolboxes either vertically, a single column, or two columns. Me, personally, I prefer the two-column layout because it's easier to spot the other tools. Especially now because you can mistakenly drag one tool, okay, over another tool set. It has happened before, but you can already reset that. Next, this is Photoshop, okay? And next, you have what? If this is Illustrator, this is Photoshop, this is InDesign. You can see the similarities between the three toolboxes, okay? So you have very similar tools as well. Now, InDesign also has a horizontal version or horizontal mode for its toolbox. If you're more comfortable in working horizontally, then you can use that as well. Now, we have the essential tools. What are the essential tools that we need for Illustrator? We have these. What are these? For Illustrator, Jiro. Jiro, what is these? What are these?
Sir, I actually don't know the name, but I I know the shortcut key, which is D for that tool.
Yeah, okay. So Jiro here knows the shortcut, but doesn't know the name of the tool. It's I will have to remind you, it's more important to know the name of the tool rather than the shortcut. But then again, it's convenience. A lot of people actually have that in common with you. They know the shortcut, but they don't know where the tool, or for that matter, the command is located. Okay, so this is the selection tools. Okay, you have the direct selection here and the selection, the group selection tool. We don't have here the selection tool, the black one, the black arrow. Okay, you also have the pen tool set. Okay, you use these in Illustrator to create the vector objects. You have here what? What are these tools? Text, text or type tools. Okay. Next,
Shape.
the shape tools. We have the rectangle, the rounded rectangle, the ellipse, okay, the polygon tools, and the star tools, the star tool, okay, the shape tools, and you have the, primarily these are your five uh, main tool sets or essential tools in Illustrator. This is what we study in basic. We have the transformation tools, we have the rotate, you have the reflect or mirror, you have the scale, and you have the skew, or I call this the Michael Jackson. Two guesses why. Anyway, you also have here the reshape tool. This is used primarily to change the shape of objects, but personally, I don't really use this. I still use the pen tool set to manipulate shapes. Okay? In Photoshop, you have the bitmap selection. You don't have selection tools for vector except for here. Okay? You have image editing. These tools here are used for editing images. But note, you also have a brush here, which I did not mention here at all because in Illustrator, the brush behaves differently. Here, when you use the brush, all of these here, all of these that you see here, okay, the patch or heel, the brush, and the brush underneath, the history brush, the stamp, the eraser, the blur and soften, the dodge and burn, all of them are technically brushes because they use brush settings. Okay, and then you also have pen tool sets in Photoshop. Okay, they are used to create vector shapes from within Photoshop. But take note, uh, any Photoshop image, anything created within Photoshop is resolution dependent, meaning even if it's a vector, of course, it will be sharp when you print it, but it's still bitmap as a result. Now, the advantage of having these, okay, in Photoshop is that when you change the scaling or the scale factor, if you resize your object, if you upscale it, the resolution is not affected, okay? It will still be vector. The shape will still be sharp. Unlike if you have a background which is bitmap, it will now be affected by the resolution change, okay? And also, type tools are also vector in Photoshop. Meaning if you change the resolution, the same with vector images, okay, it will follow suit. It's not really affected by resolution when you upsize. Of course, when you zoom in, that's a different matter. You'll be seeing the bitmap of the text, even though it's vector. Okay. Now this is InDesign. Having seen the other tools, let's play a little bit of guessing game. What is the first tool set here? Anyone?
Selection.
Selection tools. This is, if you haven't really used InDesign and you haven't really used this personally, no, I haven't used this tool. Okay, so let's skip that one first. This is the type tool. This is the
Pen tool.
pen tool. And lastly, this is the
Shape.
shape tools. Okay, you have here uh, the rectangle, the circle, and the rectangle, the ellipse, and the star tool in InDesign. Okay. Now, selection tools. This is the page tool. This allows you to manipulate a certain page, change it, crop it, resize it. Okay. So I haven't really used it. Here, these are additional page formatting tools. This is a container. Okay, you put in all of the items there in the container, and when you go to the next page, you can take it out of the container, and you'll be able to do the same, use the same layouts. It's like a repository of items or images, or a library for that matter in InDesign, making your workflow a little bit easier. You have the type tools, pen tools, and shape tools. Okay, now after this, let's take a quick break. The palettes or panels. Now, previously in the earlier versions, pre-CS, okay, we call those floating boxes at the right side of your application or your work area the palettes. But now we simply call them panels. Okay, so this is the panel or palette of
Illustrator.
Illustrator.
Illustrator. Very good. It's also easier to identify because it looks slightly different from the panels of Photoshop. And radically different is the panels of InDesign. Of course, you can arrange using the options here, the option button here, you can rearrange this, your swatch selection, you can rearrange it into this format as well. Okay, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. It's just that in this case, I just leave it as is sometimes. Okay, I can also see the name here. Now, with this layout, with the name layout or small name layout, it's easier to see the color plus the name of the color. Just in case you're using spot colors, let's say you're using swatches made of Pantone colors, you'll be able to see the name right away. Okay? You can also search for the names. Here, you have an option to search for the exact Pantone name or exact swatch name here in the options. Okay? Now, filters and effects. Back then, we had a lot of filters and effects that are third party with Photoshop. If you're familiar with Kai's Power Tools and Alien Skin, we often dump those filters and effects in Photoshop and create very nice effects, okay, from embossing to embossing and more embossing, okay, and some of them are pattern creators as well. Now, during that time, if one designer used the same set of filters, okay, as the other designer, their work will look the same. Okay, so some of us stopped using the filters altogether. At the same time, when people stopped using that, the filters and effects of Kai's and Alien Skin started to lose popularity as well. And we're back to doing the normal, simple effects that you can see in Photoshop. Besides, Photoshop adapted a few of those filters. Okay, and in Illustrator, there was one particular filter or effect that I like, which is also Kai's Power Tools, but 3D. Okay, now the 3D effect we have in Illustrator is not the same as the plugin before. The 3D plugin, the 3D effect of Illustrator now is a little bit lacking. At any rate, we still use it for creating props. So with filters and effects, you can see this in, this is for Photoshop, okay? While this is for Illustrator, okay? Back then, Illustrator and Photoshop, Illustrator had both filters and effects. They now made it all into effect, and instead they segregated it using Illustrator effects and Photoshop effects, okay? These two are specific. These work on vector images. These work on placed bitmap images. Okay, this is the extent of how you can manipulate bitmap images in Illustrator. I mean, you cannot use a brush and then edit the bitmap image in Illustrator. You have to do that in Photoshop. Okay. Now, color matching and management. Right now, nowadays, it's easy to color match. It's easy to color manage Illustrator files, Photoshop files, InDesign files because you have the color settings. All you really have to do is set this in Bridge. Okay, you can do this in individual applications. Okay, separately. Set this in Illustrator, in Photoshop, in Design. But you can also set this universally in Bridge, and it will be set across all the Adobe applications that you have. So you go to color settings, and in color settings, you simply set the particular scheme or property that you need to use. For example, Photoshop 5 default spaces. If you set all of your applications to Photoshop 5 default spaces, it will use those spaces, those color calibrations across the board. Of course, sometimes it doesn't work all the time, so you do manual calibration as well. Between the Macintosh and Windows, okay, Mac OS has its own calibrator. Okay, Windows, you still need. I'm not sure if you have color calibrator in Windows. I guess with Windows 7 there is, or Windows 10 there is already. But there's also that external spider thing, which you can put on your monitor, like so, and then you can calibrate your screen from there. Back then, those calibrators cost around uh, hundreds of thousands of pesos. Okay, nowadays it's 10,000 pesos, so uh, it's kind of worth it now to get one, especially if you're working with color sensitive projects. Now, here, when you set your color settings into this, your applications will use all of these. Whenever you get a file that's not in this color space, it will ask you now, you can set it to ask if you want to color manage that particular file. If it's using a different color setting, you can set it to ask when opening, ask when pasting. If you're copying one image to uh, another application, or when you're opening. Okay, so if it's not using the profile that you have, or the calibration, or the screen setting that you have, you may set it like so. Okay. Now, this is an old school trick. If I I still use this nowadays to test if my uh, calibration is correct between application and uh, between computers. Okay, sometimes I bring a certain file into another computer and see if my colors will match. This is mano as the color setting. Okay, what I do normally is I drag a colored shape into the window, or copy paste it into Photoshop, and vice versa, from Photoshop to Illustrator, Illustrator to Photoshop. You can also copy paste images from Illustrator and Photoshop into InDesign. Okay, and you'll be able to check if the color changes. If it does not change, then your applications are color calibrated. Okay, same with same with gradients. Okay, now don't worry, you have this on your handout. Have you downloaded your handout, by the way? Not yet? Good. You can download it later. You have it all on your handout. Okay, so I also use this to test gradients. Sometimes there are certain gradients that render very nicely in Illustrator, but not in Photoshop, or sometimes in Photoshop, but not Illustrator. Sometimes not at all in InDesign. So I test these randomly. The best colors to test are the two colors here, the two supplementary colors, red and blue, because they have an interference pattern in the middle. Okay, that interference pattern is caused by the color yellow. Okay, so you have CMYK, you have cyan and magenta here, you have magenta and yellow here. The interference is caused by yellow. Okay, it's caused by yellow disappearing into blue. Okay, nawawala na yung yellow. So I use that as well. I copy paste it in Illustrator or Photoshop or vice versa. And I'll be able to test whatever color loss or color discrepancies might occur between applications. If there's no discrepancy, then my two applications are calibrated or using the same color settings. Okay? Questions? Okay. So, text behavior and control. Now, in graphic design, text is the most important thing. You can actually create a document without images or graphics for that matter, just simply text. Okay, and you can even use text effects for making it look a little bit more interesting. Okay, uh, Illustrator has its advantages. Photoshop has its advantages. Okay, so there's a way to combine the advantages of both. In Illustrator, you can no longer put the you. I was able to do so earlier previously with that filter I mentioned earlier, the 3D filter in Illustrator. Now it's a plugin. Now it's no longer there when Illustrator added its 3D effect. Okay, I can put in a great 3D embossed effect back then in Illustrator. Nowadays I can't. I have to do it in Photoshop. Okay, I seldom do that now, but if I need to do something three-dimensional with text, okay, I have to do it in Photoshop. So here, okay, this is embossed in Photoshop. Okay, so here, this is also embossed in Photoshop, but the layout of the text is done in Illustrator. I can also do this in Photoshop, but it kind of takes me longer. So what I do is I create a block of text or a path of text in Illustrator and then export it into Photoshop as a PSD, okay, using maximum editability. So here, this is the layout in Illustrator. Okay, I export it as a PSD, high resolution. I can even make it into a higher resolution, but that doesn't really matter because my font is still vector when it's brought into Photoshop. So I can change the resolution there later on. And you turn a few of these radio buttons on. Right layers, preserve text editability. This is important. Your text must be on the topmost layer as well. Otherwise, if it's in somewhere in the middle or the bottom, it won't work. Okay, so preserve text editability, maximum editability, and anti-alias. Okay. Now, anti-alias usually works with mostly with bitmap images. If you have a placed bitmap images and then you export it, okay, it will allow you to export the original bitmap into a smoother uh, image. It also works with certain vector objects. As such, it will soften the edges instead of it being too sharp. When it's too sharp, it will create a stair step or jagged pattern. Questions? So in this case, we're combining the the functionality of Illustrator and the functionality of Photoshop to create this. Okay. Now you can also, once you save this in Photoshop, okay, you've applied the effect in Photoshop. You can open that same Photoshop file in Illustrator and it will still maintain the editability of the text. Okay, so you can re-edit the text later on back into Illustrator. Okay, but it has certain limitations. Now, I've also shown you this earlier on with the, Yvonne saw this earlier, right? These same four images, well, not this one. Okay, this is how most of these are done in Illustrator. Of course, this is done in Photoshop. This is done in Photoshop. This is done in Illustrator. Okay, even the shadow is done in Illustrator. This one is mostly Illustrator. Well, yeah, all of this is Illustrator. Okay, all of these are vector. The masthead, the Pokemaniac masthead, took me hours to fix because of I didn't use layers. So I sometimes when I'm working on one section, I mistakenly send it backwards and I get lost. Okay, back then I didn't use layers to my own downfall. Okay, so this is the first time I used the gradient mesh. I will see that later on. Custom actions. Back then, when I wasn't aware of actions, I had to edit something like 100 to 250 photos. It's a simple conversion, turning color into black and white, or grayscale for that matter. And I had to do it manually one by one. So open one file. I cannot open multiple files back then because 19, it's late 1990s. Computers were 33 megahertz speed. Now, I hear people complaining, oh, I only have 3 gigahertz. So anyway, uh, I had to open one photo, okay, and then convert it to grayscale. If I had to change the resolution, I would do that as well, okay, and then save into another file if need be. Kasi when you save the file as is, it will overwrite the old file, so you lose the color information. So what we do is save it into another disk. And you have to do that 250 times. Okay? Took me several hours to do so. But I got the work done. Until, of course, we discovered actions. Now, actions allow you to do these repetitive things quickly, and you can even leave the computer doing it by itself. Then you go out for coffee, and then when your boss asks you, why are you, what are you doing here? Bakit ka nakatambay? Sir, the computer is processing photos. Great excuse, right? You should do some other thing. Sir, there's no other available computer. Okay? So, anyway, the magic of customs, okay? Uh, you have a certain set of commands that you can record in Photoshop, and when you record it, you can play it later on and set, say, an origin folder, okay, and a destination folder. So it will get everything from that folder and convert it to whatever it needs converting to, like again, from color to grayscale, and then save the resulting file in a destination folder. Okay, it can process 1,000 photos. I've done this 1,000 photos in as little as an hour. Okay, of course, still depends on how big the resolution of the photo, of the original photo is. How big, who amongst you are familiar with photography? Anyone? Jay? Jiro? You're familiar? Don't be shy. JR, you're familiar with photography? How familiar are you with the largest megapixel value currently? Is it still 24 or it's already 32?
For high-end camera, sir, mga 100 na, sir.
100 na. Okay, so I'm way behind. I'm still using 24 MP megapixels, my old Nikon. So I need to upgrade my system, my 100 MP. Like, what would you do with that large format? Okay, high resolution, heavy detail. You can see the skin tone and the skin texture photography. Okay, so, okay, fine. So sometimes with that big a file, it will take a while to open. You'll be able to do other stuff because, of course, most systems nowadays can handle multiple tasks and multiple threads. Okay, so while it's processing in the background, you can work on something else like create graphics. Okay, so that's the benefit of actions. In Illustrator, okay, I haven't really used the actions panel because there's nothing required for me to do repetitively. Okay, when you do use it in Illustrator, okay, to simplify things, when you batch process certain vector objects, which I haven't done, okay, it will simplify the process using actions. In Photoshop, it's more useful, the actions are more useful because I do batch process photos. Okay, questions? Why are there no questions?
Sir,
Okay, so
ah,
yes.
history ba to yung actions parang history nung ginawa mo?
Not really. History is a list of things that you have been doing from start to finish. When you open a file, then you edit, okay, it saves it in the history. Okay? Actions are predetermined activities. Okay? You open, okay? You open, you change the color scheme from CMYK to RGB or vice versa. You change the detail resolution from 300 to 72. You change the color value from RGB to grayscale, so on and so forth. Okay, there's no image manipulation there except for the color changes, the resolution changes. Okay, in history, when you do something and manipulate the image, it records it. This one records the actions itself, not your actions by hand, but the action of the filter or the converter, okay? And records it as a repeatable action. Okay, parang machine ano siya, parang machine process. You know, how are worker bots or machines taught how to weld at the same spot over and over again? When it's taught by guiding the welding spot, guiding the welding arm right on that spot. Okay, each and every time. So whenever something comes in, it will weld on that spot. Something comes in, it will weld that spot. It's the same with actions. Okay, you're not doing anything else to the image, but it's possible that when you add a brushstroke, okay, or add a let's say you add a watermark, you will be able to do that as well using actions. Okay, and this is where you go to activate that. You go to File, Automate, and Batch. And in Batch, this will give you this will allow you to select the action that you need uh, to to take repetitively, the repetitive action. Okay, the source folder or the origin folder, and you also have the destination folder in which you can create on the fly or indicate somewhere else. Okay, questions? InDesign doesn't really have this. Okay, next, manipulating images. Uh, in Illustrator and Photoshop, they both have, well, all of the applications here have layers, but in InDesign, I seldomly use layers at all. I sometimes use layers for the background image, like what I've done here. This is actually on a the background image is on a separate layer on a formatted page master. Okay, so when I go to a certain page, I won't be able to manipulate this. Okay, so in layer behavior and control, in Illustrator, each object that you create, even just a point, okay, is its own sublayer, meaning it will accumulate like this over time as you work. So every distinct object will be part of the same layer, but on different sublayers. In Photoshop, it's quite different. Okay? In Photoshop, okay, so before in Photoshop, in Illustrator, before you can have a new layer, you have to create a new layer using the new layer icon. Okay? It's not automatic. Unlike in Photoshop, it's automatic. Once you add something, it's a new layer. Once you add text, it's a new layer. You copy paste something in Illustrator into Photoshop document, it's a new layer. Now, the similarities between the two is that here in Photoshop, these are all individual layers. Here, these are all individual sublayers. In Photoshop, if you need to group them together, you need to put them inside a layer group. So, a layer in Illustrator is a layer group in Photoshop. Okay? Even I got confused back then. Don't worry about it. Cross application file management. So, how do you use an Illustrator file in Photoshop? You can simply open an Illustrator file, an AI file, into Photoshop. Okay, go to Photoshop, open AI file. If it has layers, it will break it down into layers. But you can also export it as a PSD, as I've demonstrated earlier, as I've shown earlier with the text, exporting the text from Illustrator to Photoshop. Okay. Now, once you export this, you have to be careful because nowadays, when you click on a certain file name, your file will reflect that clicked file name. And sometimes you can accidentally overwrite, say, a PSD file, okay, that has important layering, important compositing, and you'll be replacing that file. So be careful when you're exporting files into PSD from Illustrator. You might overwrite an important document. So here, when you save it as a Photoshop file, make sure you send it or save it in a different folder of the file that you are working on. Okay? And here, you can set the resolution. I've shown you this earlier. You can set the resolution as needed. Sometimes you can change the resolution to something higher or lower depending on what is needed by the client or what is needed by the project. Okay? Now, when you convert Photoshop layers, this is when you open a PSD file. When you convert Photoshop layers to objects and then make text editable, this is when you put FX in Photoshop, you'll be able to edit the text. But when you flatten it into a single image, you will not be able to edit those things anymore. Meaning the object is flat, meaning it's already a bitmap image. There's no way for you to edit them when you import or open a Photoshop document in Illustrator. Questions? No questions. Let me just take a quick, just here, 30-second break to breathe. Okay. Also, a file placed in Illustrator can remain a link if you set it as a link. How do you do that in Illustrator? By, I'll launch Illustrator. Let's continue while Illustrator is launching. Now, masking. We should be all familiar with this because we're wearing these every day when we go out, the masks. Okay. Now, masking. Uh, Simply put, masking is when we isolate certain images into certain shapes. For example, this one. Where is this mask made? Illustrator or Photoshop? Or InDesign for that matter? Yvonne?
Illustrator.
Illustrator. Okay. Again, trick question. Usually I put out Illustrator first. Now this one is a text mask in Illustrator, meaning this is not a vector object or a vector shape, although texts are vector. Okay? So, since it's text and it's still editable, even though it's already a part of a mask group, you can change this later on. You can edit the mask itself, which is text, into a different spelling. Okay? In Photoshop, you can't really do this because once you set a shape, even text, as a mask, it will turn into a bitmap shape. Okay, that's the limitation with Photoshop. But you cannot do this in Illustrator. Soft masking, meaning you can isolate the area around the eagle or the image for that matter to make it look a little bit softer. Okay, some of the parts will be transparent in Photoshop. Okay, there's something similar in Illustrator. It's called the gradient mask, but it's not really that soft as this one here. Also, it still relies very much on the sharp edges of your shape that you use as a mask. Any questions? Now, realistic effects. One of my favorite tools in Illustrator is this. Sorry, let's go Photoshop first. In Photoshop, you have the image editing tools, primarily the brushes. You have the heal or patch tool, heal and patch tool, not or, clone tool, the eraser, the blur, sharpen, and smudge. They're in one group, okay? The brush and pencil, history brush tool. You can create nice, nice looking effects with the history brush tool. Gradient and paint bucket tool, dodge, burn, and sponge tool. These are all image editing tools in which what's wrong with this image? This is an old image, right? So what's wrong? What do we need to do here? What's wrong first? Noy, what's wrong with the image? Can you see the image?
Grainy,
Any, what else?
noise, saka old image.
It's
Black
an
and
old
white.
image. It's an old black and white image. It has a lot of damage, and you can fix this in Photoshop. Back then, this was a high-paying job. Back then, because only very few of us can actually fix this. Back then, more than 20 years ago, graphic designers, image manipulators, okay, Photoshop magicians were very, very rare and were actually paid very, very high bucks, a lot of bucks for being able to fix this. Nowadays, medyo iba na yung presyuhan, ano? So, this one, you can easily fix using those same tools, especially when the heal and patch tool came in. We were so glad because it's much, much better than the clone stamp tool. Okay? Or the stamp tool or the clone tool. This one is done all using heal. Minor use of the clone tool, but it was done using the heal and patch. Now, this one is still relatively simple to fix because the damage is not really major. There are certain photos that I've edited before that are really, really damaged. There's basically nothing to fix anymore. okay, but to recreate the image, okay, and that's beyond my expertise. But I've seen people who are able to recreate images from basically nothing, okay. So those are real good Photoshop users. Now, in contrast, illustrators, the closest thing to realistic effects that Illustrator can give you is the Illustrator's gradient mesh. Of course, where's the gradient mesh? Notice that this is an older version of the Illustrator toolbox, but you can see that it basically hasn't changed throughout the years. So this is the gradient mesh. The gradient mesh tool allows you to create gradient effects within a certain shape, okay? But vary colors using mesh points. Okay, for example, this one. Is this a photo? Everyone, is this a photo? Christine, I haven't heard you for a while. Christine,
Looks like a photo, but it looks like too sharp to be a photo also.
it looks too sharp. It can be an airbrush illustration, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yvonne, do you agree with Christine?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is actually an Illustrator document, an Illustrator image using gradient mesh. If you note, those individual mesh points actually have different colors to create the gradient between those node points. So this one is a different color, this one is a different color, so on and so forth, and it creates that illusion. I've used this before. This is not mine. This is Ferdinand Bladeras. At first, you'd think that this is just a Photoshop rendition, right? Like it's created with Photoshop airbrush, and it's actually a vector image. Okay, relatively simple. Now, I got jealous. I can do that too, I said, and did this. But this one is a bit incomplete. I did not finish this anymore. I just used this as a teaching tool on on uh, on trying to cheat because I cheated here. Of course, this is all vector, but this is unfinished, and all of the hair here are just brush strokes using pads and brushes in Illustrator. Okay, looks kind of, Sadako. Okay, the ring looks kind of like that. Okay, now gradients and blends. Gradient mesh isn't really my forte. Gradients and blends is. With gradients and blends, I can create this kind of image. It looks like photo, right? But this is more a set of vector objects that are blended together with applied gradients. As such, you can see how relatively simple the design is. But of course, I can easily use this as or do this in Photoshop as well. But this is not a Photoshop document. Okay, this is actually a photo I chased over. Now, this is also an example of something you shouldn't do when using photos that you do not own. Okay, when you use, I just asked the original photographer. Uh, I downloaded the photo. I saw the photo. It's nice. I'm gonna use it for vector. I forgot to to take note who the photographer is, and then I posted it. And then when I finally, I actively looked for the photographer. and then notified him, hey, I created a vector version of your photo. Is it okay? If it's not, I'll take it down. He said, okay. And then this is in DeviantArt. Are you familiar with DeviantArt? DA. Okay? It's posted there. I even followed him. So when he posted, he ranted about this guy using his photo for his own benefit, so on and so forth. By the way, I did not make any money out of this, but again, that's not really the point. When you use someone else's photo, make sure you secure permission first. Because usually, especially some of the photographers, most of the photographers will require monetary compensation when you use their images. Okay? Questions? Someone raised their hand. Okay. Next, object linking. Now, this is close to, if you have an object in Illustrator, then copy pasted it in Photoshop or in InDesign. In Photoshop, it will become part of the Photoshop object, okay, or the Photoshop document. But you can still be able to edit that particular object in Illustrator if you set it as smart object. Are you familiar with smart object? Are you familiar with smart objects? Okay. Smart objects are actually links, okay, or Photoshop links. In InDesign, when you paste the vector object in InDesign, it becomes embedded as a vector object from within InDesign. It's not really linked anymore. Now, in InDesign, when you link something, you won't be able to edit it within InDesign. A pasted object, a pasted vector object is editable within InDesign. As such, this one is an object created in Illustrator. This is gradients and blends. Okay. Another here, I don't really know the source anymore. The site is no longer active, so there's no way for me to credit it back then. So I traced this. I used this as a teaching tool, copied it, and pasted it as a smart object. And I'll be able to manipulate this not in Photoshop but in Illustrator by double clicking Option or Alt double clicking on the image itself. Here on the layers panel of Photoshop, it will open again in Illustrator, not as this file here, but a vector object, vector smart object 1 or 2 or 3 as the case may be. Okay? It's now embedded in Photoshop. Okay? And if you open this from within Photoshop, Photoshop will tell you this. After editing the contents, choose file, save, commit changes, so on and so forth. Changes will be reflected upon returning to untitled one. This does not save your vector file in an external file. It saves it within Photoshop. Okay, you wouldn't find this file name. Well, I have a lot. Would you believe I have a lot of untitled ones and twos and threes somewhere scattered across the regions of my hard disk? Because sometimes I just, okay, I'm lazy changing or naming files. Okay, untitled one. Okay, so specifically when I'm looking for that particular image or object, okay, what's the file name again? So one of the things that you should take note of, okay, name your files. Okay, the file must be saved in this to the same location. If the save as dialog appears, choose cancel and flatten the image before saving. This has never happened to me, so again, it might happen to you. Okay, smart linking. This now is in InDesign. During the creation of this particular webinar, okay, we're almost done. I created several graphic objects, mainly the Power Cube. Okay, it's spread across 3 artboards in Illustrator: the Power Line, the power triangle, and the power cube. And I had to place it in InDesign in separate pages. So what did I do? Okay, I used smart linking. In InDesign, you can set your file. This is my Power Cube file in Illustrator, okay, and I save this as an AI file. You can place multiple page documents like AI or PDF in InDesign consecutively depending on where you want to put it. Okay, so you can set one page, one image to paste on this page, page 1, another at page 2, another at page 3, and that's what you saw earlier on as we were scrolling. Okay, so these are the exact 3 objects that you saw earlier on. Now, when you import this or you place this in InDesign, you show import options, okay? And then the import options will show you this. You have the preview of all the pages. You can choose which one to place, click on preview page, or you can click all by using by clicking here, or a certain range. Okay, since this is just a 3-page document, I chose all and started to place those. I'm clicking OK here. Sorry. Okay, and started placing those individual illustration in separate pages. Okay, so any questions? Any question? Take a 5-minute break. I'll just prepare this.
All right. So we'll be back at 4:02.
No. Stay there. Just take a break where you are
All
at.
right. Okay.
This will be a okay.
Just,
So I'll share a different screen. Can you see my screen now? What do you see? Everyone, what do you see?
Design.
It's the intro page of InDesign. This is where you create new pages. So let's create a new page. You can see here my the recent documents that I've opened and worked on. Okay, so as you can see, this has undergone a lot of iterations over the years. So let's create a new document. Any document will do, any size document will do, but I usually go to print, and then in print, I usually use inches and the letter here, okay, create. So, and then I have a single page here. Now, I can simply create a new page and another page, and I'll place all of those 3 . Okay, and I'll look for okay. Now you can see that this is the Power Cube document. Okay, it's an AI format. When I place this, you need to show import options, so you can choose which one to place. But if you did not, you'll be able to place it anyway. So When you click all, like so, it will show you, it will preview you the first object. So you can go here. It will not do anything until you click to place. So let's place the first one. Okay. It's now previewing the second one, like so, and the third one, like so. You can place them in individual page. Now, since this is vector, note that if I change the scale here, like so, it's still sharp. Okay? I can zoom in, it's still sharp. That's the benefit of vector images when it comes to doing graphic design. Any questions? Now, let's go to Photoshop. Let's go back to Illustrator. In Illustrator, let's create new. Okay. What I want to show you is this. This is a simple shape. I lost my okay. I'll put in a regular let's say I have a color range here of yellow and then the orange. I'll remove the stroke, and this is one of the nifty things in Illustrator. The gradient mesh, when you put in a mesh point here, it will add a vertical line and a horizontal line. Now, I'll add another mesh point here, and another mesh point here, a mesh point here, and another mesh point here, and none here. Okay? So, note this mesh point here is bounded by two other mesh points. This one is not. When I add a color here, okay, when I add a color here on this point, look what happens. Can you see? Can you see the color? Let's make it a darker color, like so. Now, if I add that same color on this mesh point, bounded by two other mesh points, it's now limited here. That's what we do with this. Okay, these are all mesh points, and that's what we do in Advanced Illustrator. Okay, in Photoshop, when you create a new document, say, what's our size of the billboard earlier? Using inches. Let's go 1 inch by 1 inch first at 72. Previously, it already gives you the document size. Okay, when we say the document size, it's how much hard disk it consumes uh, on your hard disk. Okay, so you create like so, and that's how small it is at 100%. Okay? Now, if you create a new document, say 1 inch by 1 inch by 300, it will have a different size. Okay? But they're both 1 inch. So what's the difference? It's the amount of information here. Image size. When you image size the 72 pixel document, okay, it's only 15.2K. It only has 15.2K information. Whereas here, this has more information. So if you do image size, how much is it? 263K. Now, the billboard. How many inches? 0. How many inches?
50 to 55.
No, that's
Where
50 by 50 feet. How many inches? How many are those? How much are those in inches? 50 times 12.
600.
Okay, 600 inches by 600 inches. Now, now the sad thing about the new version is it does not estimate the size here anymore. In older versions of Photoshop, it gives you the size or the estimate of the file size. Okay, and then you create. Look how much it is. It will take a little bit of time to create. See that? See the beach ball of death? Beach ball of death. Come on, move, move. Wanna cancel it? There. Could not complete the command because the scratch discs are full. This is the reason why I don't do this in Photoshop at all. What I do is I create a 50 by 50 inch document in Illustrator. I'll cancel this. If it doesn't cancel, there you go. Let's just do something as big as 60 inches first. By 60 inches. Okay. My scratch discs are full because this one writes to the disk, and when we check the image size, 927 megabytes. Now I have to look at my hard disk because I've run out of space. Okay, it just cannot write anything more than 170 gig. Sigh. I'll close this. Let's create a new one. Oh wait. Anyway, let's make it 200 inches. I think it can still handle that. Size. Okay, what's the file size? It's already 10 gig. Imagine that you're working on a 1:1 document at 10 gig. As soon as you start adding layers, it will now accumulate in terms of file size. Okay? So, I usually do this. I work on 72 ppi and then downsize it later on in Illustrator as well. Or, if there's no photo or bitmap images required, I simply use Illustrator to begin with. So I'll create a new document in Illustrator, say how big, 600 by 600 inches, right? I can create something like 60 by 60 inches. 60 inches, no resolution required. Although, in Illustrator, there's the raster effects. This is not resolution whatsoever. This is the resolution your screen represents when you are putting an effect in Illustrator as such. For example, drop shadows. Okay, drop shadows are bitmap effects. It's not vector. Okay, it's just a simple proxy. So let's create the document. That's 60 by 60 inches. Take note that okay, I'm on application frame. Okay, sorry. There. Don't let me zoom any further out because I'm already at 3.12%. This entire thing is your Illustrator artboard. This entire gray thing. Let's measure how big it is. Okay, how big is it? It's 227 by 227 inches. Okay, that's the extent I can use to draw in Illustrator, but I don't even need to use that. All I need to use is 60 by 60 and then let the printer worry about interpolating the details. If all I have here are vector graphics, no problem. If I need a bitmap image placed here, what I need to do is create a 60 by 60 image at 300 dpi, that's okay in Photoshop, or edit the photo at 60 by 60 inches at 300 dpi and then place it here, and then it's already 300 dpi. When the printer extrapolates or interpolates this into 600 by 600, the resolution doesn't matter anymore. Why? Because they will bring it down to 35 anyway. Okay? Why do they do that? To conserve space, to conserve time as well. Also, you're not gonna look at the billboard this close. You're gonna look at it at a certain far away distance. And that's how you normally determine which application to use. Okay, if you're doing a billboard, you have a choice between all of the three. But to optimize the use of the application, you just need to use Illustrator. In most cases, for a single page document, are you going to use InDesign? Single page. Pwede, you can use InDesign, but it defeats the purpose. Although, if you don't have InDesign to begin with, you only have Illustrator or Photoshop, you have the choice between the two. Now, if you have a multiple page document, of course, automatically you use, what do you use for multiple pages?
In this,
InDesign, especially if you need page formatting like what we had here in our presentation. I'll change the screen again. Okay, what you see here, okay, this one here, this icon here, okay, I'll open the other one. Okay, for example, these are common elements. Okay? These are common elements. The page numbering is our common elements. You use InDesign to format those pages. You can also use Illustrator, but it's going to be laborious because in each and every individual page, you will have to put in those elements like the page number. Okay, there's no page formatting in Illustrator, so you'll have to put that on every artboard. Okay, that will become a page. The problem is if you need to add a page, okay, you will have to adjust all of the artboards, all of the pages, all of the page numbers. Okay, any questions? No questions? Are you sure? Christine, any questions?
Meron po, sir.
Good.
Who's that? Jiro?
Yes po,
What's your
meron
question?
po. Yung mesh points can be used as shadowing and highlights po.
Shadow and highlights. What do you mean?
I mean, kapag kunyari sa isang vector art po, like sa human portrait, kunyari, yung vector art, pwede ba gawin po, sir, yun na, it can be used as highlights and shadows?
Okay, I'll just, which one? You're talking about gradient mesh?
Yes po. For
Okay.
mesh tools.
The advantage of knowing the file name, simply search for it. Sana nandito. It's there. Okay? When I open this, everything here that you see is gradient mesh. Okay? Shadow, highlight. All of them are, both of them are done with gradient mesh. Now, what Ferdinand did here was amazing because all of these are separate objects. Okay? So, there's a limitation to the gradient mesh. You can only create so many mesh points as to not be confused with the form later on. Okay? So this one is the main face. This one is the background here. The rest is black. This one is the side of the nose. This one is the front ridge of the nose. This one is yung pinaka-globe ng nose. And this one is even the nostril. Okay? And of course, the lips here, like so. Okay? Jiro?
Okay na po, sir.
Okay na. So, questions? JR, questions?
Pag yung mga large scales na mga images, since advice kasi sa atin, sir, is to look where the DPI.
Pardon?
Mga large scale, sir, na mga images, usually mga billboards, binababaan natin, sir, yung DPI. Ano, sir, yung pinaka parang range, pwede na natin siyang gawing 35 or 50. Meron ba, sir, parang guide
No.
para
The conversion from higher to lower does not happen at your end. It happens at the printer's end. Sila yung gumagawa ng 35 tsaka 50. Tayo, we maintain as much as possible the right proportion. Proportionate yung layout natin. For example, again, your billboard is 50 by 50, 600 by 600 inches. Okay? 600 inch by 600 inch. Okay? So, when you lay it out in Illustrator, I will just lay it out in 60 by 60 inches, hindi 600. Kasi hindi aabot doon. Or I can use the maximum space of the artboard, which is 227. I'll just lay it out at 200 by 200 inches. Any bitmap image that I will use, I'll go to Photoshop, okay? I'll use the maximum resolution of the photo. Say, when you get a photo, for example, 300 dpi na 8 by 10. Okay? Usually, ganun yung mga nakukuha natin, ano? But as you mentioned, JR, nasa 100 MP na. So, mas mataas na ngayon yung value natin. Yung 100 MP mo, yung 8 by 10 mo magiging 600 or 800 pixels per inch na yan. So, malaki na ngayon yung ano. In billboard terms, it doesn't matter. Kahit nalakihan mo yung, malaki yung resolution o malaki yung value ng MP mo, because in the long run, babagsak nila ng 35 yan. Okay? Okay, so the resolution change, the resolution is downsized at the printer's end. In your end, you just need to make sure that you have an ample enough information, you have ample enough information, you have ample enough resolution for it to look sharp enough in close view. Okay? Kasi when you zoom in, I'm sorry, I got distracted again. When you zoom in, all the information should be there. All the information should be clear. Again, why? Because when you view it from afar, some of the details no longer matter. For example, the difference between 10% yellow and 20% yellow is very, very minimal at a far distance. Okay? That's what happens. Also, it depends on how big or how huge the difference is between the 10% and the 20% in terms of distance. Okay? That's the only time you'll notice the difference when you go closer. But when it's far, 10% here, 20% here, very, very minimal variation, not really noticeable by most people. Okay? Only when we look at it very clearly, okay, there's a certain difference there. Also, foreground image can affect the color density of the background color. So if you have a dark image here at the center, okay, if you have a dark image here, the color behind the dark image tends to be a little bit darker than the surrounding colors, even if you have a cloud surrounding. Parang nagkakaroon ng shadow effect. Okay? Questions? Noy, any questions?
Wala, sir. Okay na.
Yvonne?
None, sir.
Okay. Jiro, any more? Christine, are you still there? Are you still with us?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Nothing. I
Okay.
don't have any questions.
Just in case you do have questions, do ask it in the classroom. It's available for 15 days. You'll be able to put in, just in case a question comes to mind, put it there. We'll be able to see that question and we can address it there as well.